just thought, what a cool little movie.
And I remember that whole ending sequence where all the flesh is gone and he's just like that robot. It scared the hell out of me when I was a kid.
The entire audience was just galvanized. It was like nothing anyone had ever seen before.
I think the first movie is the strongest of the bunch because it's the simplest and it's the most direct.
What the Terminator did was take an Austrian muscle man and make him governor of California.
I had recently moved out to Hollywood, and it was 1984, and I went to see this movie that there wasn't all that much hype about, frankly. It was called The Terminator. I don't even remember why I wanted to see it, and it was this movie that spoke to me on a certain level, not because I was necessarily like interested in time travel or robots, but the dramatic tension that was in the movie and the way that the story was being told. I just looked at that and I said, that's the kind of movies that I want to be making.
What made The Terminator exciting was how fresh it was.
I first saw The Terminator in high school, I guess, and it was a riveting experience.
Get out.
I wasn't a screenwriter at the time when I saw Terminator, and I remember it was an amazing experience because I don't think I'd ever seen a movie that had that level of energy and intensity. I remember thinking that the way that the movie had put these pieces together was unlike anything ever before. It was so exciting. I saw it again in the theater a few weeks later. It had already become a phenomenon. And there were people like shouting out lines before they were set on screen. And it was just extraordinary.
I'll be back.
I remember the "I'll be back" line already was something that people were spoofing on a little bit, but it didn't have sort of the iconographic thing that it ultimately grew into.
You wonder even if it was scripted. It's just like, I'll be back. And that it worked so well and became such a cliched line is, you can't hope for that kind of thing. I mean, the second movie tried really hard with "Hasta la vista, baby," and to some degree I think that penetrated pop consciousness, but nothing will capture the accidental elegance of "I'll be back," and it's not worth trying.
Your clothes. Give them to me, now.
People are still quoting now. They're still calling him the Governator. It's probably the most quoted movie next to The Godfather, you know, of any film ever made as a result of that.
Fuck you, asshole.
You're a terminated fucker.
I remember when I was a kid and the truck blows up and you just sort of go, okay, the movie's over. But I was just like, it's still going. I can't believe it's still going. They managed to pull, you know, one more rabbit out of their hat.
He's like Dracula. Nothing stops him. He keeps coming.
And now, of course, people expect that, but it was still kind of, you know, still kind of a pleasant surprise. You know, see, oh, they still got some, you know, there's some more juice left in this thing.
That endoskeleton was a stop-motion animation. I mean, this is before you had CG creations. Although, you know, it was Cameron who really started to push the envelope in that direction. But his use of effects has always been great, and in this one it was too. And some of the things were very simple. He didn't try to do too much. He did just enough, you know, to suggest things. You know, the scenes of those futuristic battles, I think, probably were about a minute of the film in terms of total footage. But they were impressive, and they gave you a sense of what was going on and the scale of it. And, you know, that's all he needed.
Terminator was initially conceived as a, you know, an action science fiction film. So the way we arrived at the elements of the story is actually pretty simple. I knew I couldn't build elaborate sets. It was going to be a low-budget film. And so I thought, well, if I can inject an element into present day that doesn't exist right now, and there are basically two ways to do that. You know, you can have something come here from outer space, or you can have something come here from the future. These are the two tried and true ways for low-budget filmmakers. Okay, a guy comes back through time, let's make him a robot. But not a robot, a cyborg. So now you're talking about an interesting thing, which is a fusion of a cybernetic and an organic organism.
The concept of that film is so strong and big. It seems like a huge movie. In actuality, the movie was shot, I believe, for a budget of around $5 million. And the majority of it takes place in, you know, restaurants and, you know, hotels and police stations. And so it's very kind of scaled down little movie, but it feels like an enormous movie because of the concept.
It's really intense, you know, shooting on a James Cameron film, and you can even see that in Terminator 1. Without all the money and the different things that he had for his later films, still you see that Jim Cameron, kind of like perfectionist, everything's thought out and planned.
Cameron took this really modest budget and like a sponge wrung every ounce of moisture out of it, and the film felt far bigger than a small movie.
Well, time travel is just a monster as a writer, because no matter what you do, you're going to be creating paradoxes, and if you don't create paradoxes, it's not interesting. So, since time travel is just going to be insane finally and not make any sense, I really appreciated the first Terminator for just running headlong into that and saying, okay, we're just going to push this right into your face. This character is going to become the father of the man who's going to send him back to become his father, and okay, does that really make any sense? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, and it really works.
The key thing about time travel is that in all these movies, you inevitably have the scene where, two characters or three characters are talking about the time travel, and finally one character goes, enough, my head's gonna explode if I think about it anymore.
You're talking about things that I haven't done yet in the past tense. It's driving me crazy.
And the audience is like relieved, because to a certain extent, like you can only sort of process so much and finally go, all right, okay, I'm just gonna let it go. They travel through time, and this is what's gonna happen, because there's ultimately sort of the time travel paradox.
Are you saying it's from the future?
One possible future. From your point of view, I don't know tech stuff.
Then you're from the future too, is that right?
Right.
The thing I think that most impressed me about the filmmaking was not necessarily even just the technical aspect, although I think that obviously was impressive, but it was the storytelling, and that's the most important thing about directing movies, is how you tell a story.
I remember the romantic moment in the whole movie where she's saying, you've been through so much pain, oh, it's so hard, and like touching the scars on his body, and like the sexy moment, because it was like one of the only breathing spaces in the whole film.
I came across time for you, Sarah. I love you. I always have.
The thing about the Terminator movie that really hooked me in as a filmmaker and made me want to make the sequel was that here you have a story where the stakes are literally the end of the world, okay? Like nuclear annihilation of the entire planet. And yet in the same movie are these very intimate moments. I mean, T1 is really the story of a young woman's coming of age. And so that's what's so extraordinary about these movies, is that really the dynamic range of these giant spectacle action sequences on one hand, these really intimate character moments on the other. So the movie it's another way of saying that it was like an action movie with heart, and that's really difficult to achieve.
Movies were much slower 30 years ago, and now they're relentless. And the success, I think, of blockbusters like The Terminator, especially like coming from the low-budget realm, it's interesting that now we see movies very differently. And I think Terminator was a big part of changing people's perspective.
I think the legacy of Terminator is that movies since have been much more fast-paced, much more relentless, much more in-your-face, but the bar has really been raised.
I think Terminator had a huge impact, and that there have been all these clones of that movie. There's a million other Terminator-like movies that came since then, but none of them really had the purity of that vision.